Sonra buraya öğretmen olarak katılacak. Sonra öyle.
Yani
Değil mi?
Professor Tiago Andre Lopes, welcome.
Hello.
I'm really sorry because we are on the way to Hasan Cave, another town of Batman. We have some Erasmus academic guests from Germany and Italy. So I have just arrived. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation for the fourth week of Batman University Erasmus Academic Talks series. Yusuf Hocam, welcome. Associate Professor Dr. Yusuf Çınar.
Thank you very much.
Dear students.
First of all, Tiago, my very old friend, thank you very much for accepting us, and welcome to again Turkey. Again, we will meet inshallah in Batman. Thank you very much. I am very excited to hear your explanation relating to European Union and Ukraine crisis. Thank you very much, and we will listen, and after then we will ask some questions. Inshallah, it will be a very good program for us.
Okay, so thank you both to Emre Işık. I think I pronounced correctly.
Yeah, Işık, but it doesn't matter. But before your presentation,
Yes.
I will be honored to introduce you to our students, our participants. Dr. Tiago Andre Lopes finished his degree in social communication of journalism in 2008 at Abrantes Superior School of Technology at the Tomer Polytechnic Institute. In 2013, Dr. Lopes got his PhD on international relations at the Superior Institute of Social and Political Sciences of Lisbon University with the thesis titled The Dynamics of Confrontation of National Projects in North Caucasus. Dr. Lopes is an assistant professor of international relations of Portucalense University, currently pursuing also a postdoctoral project at the Orient Institute, Lisbon University. Dr. Lopes develops his work using a network of several research institutes, think tank across the globe, Euro-Atlantic Diplomacy Association in Lisbon, Portugal, Orient Institute, again in Lisbon, Portugal, Center for International Studies, Portucalense Institute for Legal Research, Observatory for Human Security, Center for Sustainability, Research and Practice in Lahore, Pakistan, Strategic Outlook in Konya, Turkey, Youth Association for a Greater Europe in Paris, France, Wikistrat in Washington, United States of America, Youth to Youth Action Hub in Lithuania, and Sustainable Leadership Initiative in Mumbai, India. Dr. Lopes, the stage is yours. Thank you very much again for this great talk.
Thank you for the invitation to both you and to Yusuf Çınar, who initially teased me to do this presentation to all of you. The idea for today is, of course, to have more of a discussion and a dialogue with all of you about the institutional responses of the EU vis-a-vis the conflict in Ukraine, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. We will also, of course, will have to speak inevitably of the role of Turkey, being so far the only country who was able to be a practical mediator, and knowing that Turkey tomorrow will host another round of talks regarding the renewal of the Green Initiative. So we need to keep that in our minds, because there is space for a potential conflict or a potential understanding between Ankara and Brussels because of this Green Initiative, but we will speak about that a little bit later today as well. I do need to ask for your understanding if I will be a little bit slower this morning. I had a very short night last night because of my obligations in terms of media here. I'm a political commentator for CNN Portugal, and sometimes they call me at bizarre hours. So I did sleep for less hours than I should. But let's focus on the issue at hand. So when the war began in Ukraine, initially what we had was the first 4 weeks of the war, we didn't have any response from the EU. So from an institutional perspective, the first 4 weeks we had this idea of understanding what this was, trying to understand if this was a short-lived conflict or a long-lived conflict, and then, of course, understanding if the Union itself could give a robust response with 27 countries, with 27 political agendas that are not always equal. That was the first difficulty, find a pathway to a sort of homogeneous action, which is not always easy. What have we seen in the last 15 months? Because what we want to understand, what all of us want to understand, me included, is how is it working and what is the goal of the EU when it responds to Russia the way it responds? EU has decided to respond in 3 different layers or 3 different paths. The first path, of course, is sanctions. Economic sanctions, however, regardless of what politicians say, we know that economic sanctions are important on a symbolic level, but they do not transform states. If economic sanctions were able to transform states, Cuba, Iran, Myanmar, or North Korea would have been transformed already. All of these regimes have been imposed on a very strict pattern of sanctions that has been for decades. And the fact is that these regimes were able to survive. And Russia was only imposed for sanctions for the last 14 months. So, of course, there's still some space for adaptability, for economic resilience from the side of Moscow. There's another interesting issue when it comes to sanctions. When the first 3 packages were implemented from the side of the EU, the idea was this: the economy of Moscow is very much entangled with the economy of the EU, and from a liberal perspective, and most of you will be international relations students, so you will know the economic interdependence theory. The idea is that disruption of a partner will lead to its economic fallout. This didn't happen, but it didn't happen because of one thing. Russia was able to orientalize its economy and to move from an European-driven economic center to an Asian-driven economic center. Russia is still selling its energy, but now it's not selling to Germany and to Poland, it's selling to India and to China. True, it's selling with a lower price. Also true, it's selling in a bigger volume. So in terms of the balance of the scale, it's keeping even with a higher profit. But there was another issue, of course, the fact that Russia was able to convince the OPEC member countries to lower the production of oil, which led to an increase of the price, which allowed for Russia to capitalize on that level. That was the first side. But the interesting part of on the response of the EU has been another issue. EU, although it seems it's not a coherent diplomatic actor. What we have inside the EU, what we could see is a pattern with 3 different streams or 3 different avenues. The first group of countries we can call the idealists are led by Poland and the Baltic republics. What they want is for the EU to impose stricter sanctions. They also want the EU to allow Ukraine to have a green avenue for fastly becoming a member state of the EU. The problem is that this would open diplomatic conflict and diplomatic tension with countries like North Macedonia, Montenegro, and of course Turkey as well, who have been waiting for longer, who have been trying to adapt to European conditionality, to the Copenhagen criteria for several years. And so having a country that does not fulfill the Copenhagen criteria, that would speed up to become a EU member state, potentially could lead to Skopje, Ankara, or countries like capitals like Tirana, to rescinds their will to become European Union member states. States like France, Germany, or Italy, they know this, so that's why they are being a little bit more cautious and less idealistic than Poland, Baltic republics, which are pretty much the ones we have there. Then we have the bigger spectrum is what we call the pragmatists. Pragmatists are led by Germany and by France. They mostly want to have this cautious approach in which they support economically and even militarily the effort of Ukraine. They keep the discourse on Ukraine is the ally of the European Union. Ukraine is ethically, morally, and politically on the right side of history. But that doesn't mean that the adherence to the EU will have a green light on a fast track. Yesterday, I don't know if you accompanied the news, President Zelensky was in Helsinki. He met with the Nordic countries, so he met with Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and all of them said that they all agree with Ukraine becoming a member of the EU and NATO, but none of them mentioned the fast track idea. All of them want that Ukraine to become a member on the right time. This means that the normal adherence process is it's a slow process. And for a country that is still in war, this means that it will take at least, best expectations, will take at least 2 decades for Ukraine to complete the Copenhagen criteria. So we are speaking of 2043 if things go well, which then we still need to see reconstruction, fighting corruption, reopening democratic system, revising the justice system. So it's a lengthy process. We can discuss it later on. There's a third group of countries, a smaller group of countries, which are what we can call the cautionist or the cautious countries. These are led by Hungary, who seems to be alone sometimes in the opposition against the Commission, but it's a false isolation. Hungary has the tacit support of Romania and Bulgaria. These 3 countries have a geographic and economic proximity with Moscow. They depend energetically on Moscow, and they do not see the benefit of going all antagonistic against Moscow because of another issue. If we think on the post-conflict, after the conflict, when the war is over, being it today or in 1 year or in 6 months, Russia will still exist as a state. The borders of Russia will still be closer to Bulgaria, not far from Romania, and so they do not want to have a neighbor with whom they cannot have economic and diplomatic relations. That's why they have been slower in accepting all of these sanctions game. They have been slower in accepting the mechanisms like the peace mechanism, which I'll speak after this. And that's why this sometimes seems to be in opposition to the European Commission policies. These 3 groups, they are able to impose economic sanctions. They have been not that able to agree on political sanctions. And also there is no agreement at all at European level when it comes to the European Commission idea to set a special international court to judge the crimes committed on Ukraine. This is because of 2 things. A, the European Union lacks legitimacy to set any sort of international court. The International Criminal Court already said that. It already reminded the EU that the EU cannot set an international court just because it wants to. B, when it comes to international law, the other thing is, in terms of legal procedures, the rule is explicit consent, meaning that Russia will have to agree to any court that can judge Russia before the court can start its functions. Tacit consentment doesn't work in international law. And so that will be a problem that the Commission will have to solve at some point or drop and abandon the idea. After the sanctions, there are now 2 other mechanisms. The so-called peace mechanism, it's the mechanism for joint procurement of weapons and ammunition. EU wants to buy together weaponry, bullets, missiles, and so on to send to Ukraine. This seems an interesting political idea, but it has a problem. Countries like Germany and Poland want this mechanism to be fully implemented as soon as possible. France, however, and the Netherlands, they want this mechanism to be applied to the European military industry, meaning that this is not a mechanism to fund the USA or New Zealand or Australia's military industries. This is a mechanism for self-funding the European Union re-industrialization in the military sector. However, this means that before we can produce en masse, we need to reactivate the industries that we have deactivated. Because of 7 decades of peace, Europe naturally, one has to agree, Europe, of course, deactivated a lot of its industrial industry complex. We didn't need it to produce en masse missiles, bullets, and so on. And so a lot of the factories were closed. Now, the war, of course, obliged to revise this policy of closing down the industry. And that's what France says. This peace mechanism needs to support the effort of countries like France, Belgium, Netherlands to reactivate its industries and not to become a grant institution for USA or even the UK to come have some money and sell ammunition with the EU money to Ukraine. There's a third mechanism which was now decided recently. It was actually decided this Monday, called ASAP, which is a mechanism for fast procurement of bullets and ammunition. Because Ukraine, of course, is fastly burning the stocks. We are speaking of a large conflict, which multiple war fronts at the same time, because we have battles happening at the same time in Bakhmut, but also in the Donbas area, in Crimea, in the cities of Avdiivka. Let me see if I remember all of the war places right now which are active. We know that there's one city now, I'm skipping the name, it will come to my mind at some point, but we know that there are at least 6 fronts in this, meaning that a lot of ammunition is daily consumed. So EU has a new mechanism, but this mechanism might have a political problem for Europe, which is it's a €1 billion mechanism coming from other European funds, but we don't know which funds. Meaning probably social funds or other programs have been emptied out of economic resources, but public discussion was not made yet. And that's a problem here, is that the lack of public discussion is leading some public opinions to starting to question the motivation of this response of the EU, in which the population is not involved in the decision process. And if the EU's main idea is that the EU is a democratic space, open, transparent, prone to discussions, then we do need to discuss when money is being allocated from social funds to procurement of weaponry, procurement of ammunition. This is opening now new diplomatic breaches between the EU member states. So that's another part of the response. The third response, and that's where Turkey becomes important, is this. The European Union knows it cannot be a mediator in this conflict because it has chosen a side, a very clearly chosen one side. So, of course, Moscow will never accept EU's role as a potential mediator. We also know that another thing. We know that Turkey, because of internal elections, presidential and then parliamentary this year, Turkey will have, of course, to slow down its efforts on the diplomatic arena, because first it needs to reorganize its house internally. It's very normal whenever the country is going through elections or through any other sort of political internal turmoil, they disappear from the international sphere. We saw that with France disappearing from the sphere because of the Yellow Vest protests. We saw that with Germany's regional elections that led to Germany's disappearance from the international community. We will now see the same with Turkey, the natural slowing down of diplomatic effort, because A, you first need to choose your president, B, then you are going to renew your parliament. So it's normal that you will slow down the effort. What is the main question right now on the table? We know there was a proposal from the United Nations Secretary General for Turkey to use its banking system to be a mediator between Russia and the international monetary system. We also know that Turkey already questioned the EU with this question: are our banks going to be sanctioned if they support this initiative? Because this initiative is not a Turkish initiative, it is a United Nations initiative. And the answer to this question will be essential to see if the grain deal will be renewed or not until the 18th of May. Because of course Turkey will not enter into any deal if it's then going to be sanctioned because it's entering into a deal as a mediator. The other issue, and I'll finish here because I think debate will be the most interesting part of this. The other issue in this institutional response is this. Until now, we know public support has been favoring policies towards supporting Ukraine. However, and this is where some of us, some of the analysts are starting to be a little bit concerned. We have no new pools of support since January 2023. So until now, we are operating on a framework that might have been transformed. Things like inflation, in some countries, growing unemployment, and so on. Domestic issues might lead public opinions to pressure governments to support less Ukrainian, support more domestic issues. And that might become a problem in the short to medium term for a coherent and cohesive institutional response from the side of the EU. And that challenge will probably come to us in a time in which, although there are many proponents to be mediators, India, China, Israel, Vatican are trying to become mediators. So far, no country besides Turkey was able to do this mediation game as coherently and as proficiently as Ankara has played the game. And now I'm willing to all of your questions.
Professor Lopes, thank you very much for your presentation. Professor Çınar, would you like to say something?
I can start.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Very, very good presentation. Especially my question, multipolar world order now is working, especially if you look at Russia, if you look at China, if you look at European Union, and if you look at United States. We know that Cold War term, if you remember that, for example, if United States decided some decision, every country had to accept them. But now, for example, Turkey, if you look at Turkey's foreign policy relating to Russia, Turkey wants to balance between Russia and Western countries. And this process, especially inside of multipolar world order, what do you think about it? Could you share your opinion? Thank you very much.
Okay, a good question as I expected from Professor Çınar, which always does very good questions to all of us and obliges us to think a little bit ahead. On this, we have two issues coming from this. Number one, we are clearly right now in what we call a power transition moment. We are moving from one sort of international architecture, which was American-centric, unipolar policy goals, to an international system that seems to be a little bit more multipolar, with multiple